We now have a presentation sponsored by Disco on community managers can't be everywhere. Shocking. I added that part by Todd Nilson. Todd is a community strategist with over 25 years of consulting experience, where he's honed his expertise in community building, digital workplace transformations, and marketing strategy. He also has background in competitive intelligence research, game thinking, recruitment, employer branding, and virtual collaboration practices. He is well-rounded as an expert for sure. His leadership has been instrumental in delivering transformational technology, workshops and projects for brands like Activision, Facebook, SAP, Truth Initiative, and so many more. And with that, Todd, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce you, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's so exciting to be on with so many community professionals today, to be celebrating community building, and the work that we do that is so important for the brands and organizations that we represent. Today, as you mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about an uncomfortable truth that the community managers can't be everywhere. I've been thinking about this as an issue for some time, ever since I saw Richard's terrific article on feverbee.com and some of the subsequent conversations that have come up around it. And for me, it's raised a lot of questions, some of them uncomfortable, which for me is always a good sign that being uncomfortable means that it's something that's worth thinking about and spending some time with. So I'll caveat this conversation by saying that I don't have all the answers here, but this is just some things that I've been ruminating on since this has come up as a notion. And it's raised some questions, such as, if all of my brand's followers are living on X or on TikTok or Instagram, does that now mean that I'm a community manager of those platforms? And has the centralized community platform gone the way of the dodo bird? Is it extinct? Or is it dead and doesn't know it yet? How did we get here exactly? And more to the point, why are we even asking some of these questions? Well, I think, with where we've come to in 2023, we've definitely had to acknowledge, that community managers can't be everywhere. Because is community management on a multi-platform basis even possible? How many platforms are you going to manage? 3, 5, 10? Burnout, as we've already seen in some of the community research from groups like CMX or Community Roundtable in 2019, saying that 50% of community professionals struggle with burnout. And I believe the Australian research report as well had come out and said that as many as 28% identified burnout as a very real issue. We certainly need to guard ourselves, and the whole idea of why we would want to take on more platforms is a point of anxiety for me personally. But leaving aside burnout, isn't this also biting into the act of social media managers at the same time? And so how does that relationship work? So I'll start by saying this isn't a talk about community manager mental health, even though that's a really real and important and vital issue. But this is more of a talk, I think, about the need for selective focus, for intentionality, to use a phrase that my friend Ilker, a consul, often brings up and he attributes to me. First off, a bit of a dose of truth. Community everywhere is only a thing for us, for community professionals. It's not really an issue, or it's not really a topic of conversation for anybody outside of our circle, as nearly as I can tell. If you do a little bit of SEO searching on community everywhere as a topic, you find that at best, it's maybe getting 70, 80, 100 searches per month. So it's not high volume traffic at all. In addition, the idea that there's cross-platform customer engagement is old news. That there are fluid boundaries around official and unofficial communities, also old news. And community metrics integration with other platform data also old news. In fact, we've got some great platforms such as Orbit to be able to pull together multi-platform metrics for our use. Another bit of truth, though, as I've been thinking about this, is that the followers who engage on social media with our brands do so casually and out of personal convenience. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be or won't be interested in a centralized or owned community. At least some of them will be, which is okay. Supporting an ecosystem doesn't mean that we need to own all of those channels or to abandon that hub and spoke model with centralized community platform at the middle and other social kinds of platforms or spaces as feeders for that space. Ecosystem management should never assume that there is no center or that having a center is somehow pointless. At least this was my reaction to it. And if only a minority of brand followers want a centralized community, that doesn't negate its validity. That underscores its value in my thinking. I think a lot about Ram Sethi, the author of I'll Teach You to Be Rich, who says, I'd rather have 100 committed people than thousands of followers. Well, that's kind of what we do with community and kind of the way that I think about it. So just to really be clear, I definitely advocate for people over platforms, but I feel like ignoring platform choice and our intentionality about them is kind of like trying to ignore the skeleton in your body. It's what's underscoring or providing structure for an experience within a community. So let's go a little bit deeper into why managing multiple platforms, has its challenges. First of all, being everywhere can dilute the quality of interactions. So for us to try to manage all those multiple platforms is kind of a losing proposition. And the quality of the interactions that we're getting is a lot harder to manage on multiple platforms. Being everywhere also poses some challenges for what's official content, official stances or opinions. And managing being everywhere is frankly exhausting. How do I share everywhere? Finally, being everywhere may discourage some deeper interactions and unduly favor others, may actually be problematic for getting a diversity of opinions and ideas in a space. So these things always make me kind of go back to the Tony Robbins quote that complexity is the enemy of execution. Now, how does this play into some of the experiences that I've had or ways that I relate to this? Well, there's a customer that I've worked with fairly recently that had Facebook groups and Slack as their attempted community platforms. For various reasons, these didn't work out. And so they had decided, and when they engaged me, that they were going to be starting a new centralized community platform. Pretty early into the engagement, we discovered, they weren't aware of it in this particular work group, that there was a subreddit that existed that was specific to the brand. And it raised the question of, should we keep going or should we jump into this earned community, this subreddit, and make that the central community experience? To which I ended up asking the question, well, is that subreddit serving the needs of everybody? Does it serve your needs as an organization? Does it serve those customers' needs who want that free space to have open conversation? Are there different conversations that we can enable and provide within a more official centralized platform? And then I also had to ask, just because a spot on the internet is buzzing, that doesn't mean it's the right spot for those customers. It doesn't mean it's the best place to be. And my takeaway from thinking about this in terms of community everywhere was that building community isn't necessarily about chasing crowds across a fuzzy mesh of interaction, but that intentional design of those experiences is what leads to building the right spot. I also related this to some of my personal nerdy experiences as a gamer. In the early 2000s, there was an online multiplayer game in beta that I joined. And there were maybe about 50 of us who were early players in this environment. It was set in this sprawling medieval castle. And as we started exploring this environment and going there, we ended up congregating in a fairly central area, which was the kitchen of the castle. And as rooms were added, we ended up flowing into some of these other spaces. At times, the castle seemed like it was too big, so we still ended up congregating in the kitchen. Was it the best place for us to have our interactions? No, but it was where everybody knew to go. We went there for convenience. So there was no conscious effort that had led to this suboptimal experience. There were definitely more interesting places to gather that were more relevant to some of the groups or subgroups that formed within the game. And so again, for me, the takeaway here is that just because everyone gathers in one particular channel or venue, it doesn't mean that it's serving the long-term needs of anyone, even the people that are choosing to stay there. So how do we move forward for this? Well, I'm a big fan of Bruce Lee and some of his philosophy and wisdom. And one of the quotes that I like to come back to again and again is that it's not the daily increase, but the daily decrease. You have to hack away the unessential. And the closer that you get to hacking those things away, the less waste there is, the less loss of energy. And I think of a couple of examples of brands or platforms that were able to hack away at what they did, such as GitHub, that was engaging on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and at the time, Google+, in addition to their own platform. And in 2017, they decided to narrow down to just Twitter and then their own platform. As a result, they were able to see more concentrated activity, 200% boost of engagement. Similarly, the Dell community for customers and partners was living on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Khoros. And in 2021, they decided to just narrow that to Twitter and Facebook they dropped Twitter and Facebook and they decided to put more energy into Khoros. And as a result, also similarly, their posts and their comments soared about 150%. So again, by being a little bit more intentional, a little bit more focused in the approach in the ecosystem, they were able to gain greater results in their communities. So at this point, you may think about, how do I get my brand's followers into a more intentionally designed community space? If there is a centralized experience place, how do I get them into this more ideal space? They like TikTok or whatever their platform of choice is. Do I just tell them that we're no longer going to be there? Well, certainly not. If there's engagement there and it's valuable, it's definitely worth retaining. And I would also say we don't need to manage that as community professionals. I would say render under the social media manager what is the social media manager's. Instead, I like Bruce Lee's other big quote, which is be like water. You need to find ways to logically help members flow into those spaces that are more ideal or more conducive to the kinds of contributions that they may want to make. How do we do this? Well, we have those conversations with the customers, with the members of the community. We create those safe spaces, the stuff we're good at. And we also communicate really well about why they would want to go there and how it can be useful to them. Help them to see it. Don't just tell them what it's going to be. In using the be like water metaphor, you want to move the stones out of the way so that the water can flow in a new direction. TikTok can still be a great door to your community. It just doesn't need to be the living room where everybody hangs out. So telling a good story about that place to move into is kind of like following the laws of nature, letting gravity work for you, helping you to be like water. Finally, being everywhere isn't a strategy, it's a reaction. Acquiescing to where your audience currently is a strategy of inaction. Being a shaper of digital ecosystems, however, means hacking away what's unnecessary and focusing on delivering value. And again, I make that distinction between shaping and nurturing. This all begins with an audit, and I would say collaborating very closely with your digital marketing teams, mapping those ecosystems and the interactions that are happening in each of the channels or places where you have members or customers interacting. Interview and observe the activities that are happening there for the members in each one of those platforms, and then design intentionally the owned and central community experience. You don't want to compete with those. You want to flow around and complement what they're doing. And to ensure this, I'll often use something in my charter documents called the unlike statement. Excuse me. For those of you familiar with user stories, a user stories is constructed with the role as a member of this community. I want to accomplish this task X, whatever it is, so that I can achieve some benefit. Add on to that statement an unlike. Unlike makes it important for you to articulate how you're doing something in the community that's going to be different than any of the other places within the ecosystem. And as a practical approach, I think it's something that is important to consciously play your way through. So again, if you try to be everywhere at once, you'll end up being nowhere. I hope that I've challenged maybe some of your notions about the community everywhere approach and thinking about it practically, and suggest some ways that you can flow your members from earned social spaces into owned or centralized community, rather than dulling your impact, sapping your energy with frantic, low quality activity and poor results. It's not an easy approach for community management, but I think it's a worthwhile one, and that's where my thinking's at. I'd love to hear some of your questions or thoughts in the time, if we have some time permitting, and I'll put it back to you, Victoria.
Todd, that was fantastic. Another presenter that has the chat box absolutely popping. So definitely make sure you check that. The people are screaming your name from the chat box rooftops. We do have questions, and I think we've got, let's see how much time we have. But first is, how do you determine which platforms to focus on? And secondarily, does your community voice change per that community platform?
Wow, those are really great questions. So, I mean, I can only answer it from personal experience. Even in my journey and what I've done with Clocktower advisors, for my company, I tried in early years to be on every platform, and I've had to make some hard decisions about where I can actually focus my energy and where I feel like I make the most impact. And for me, that's ended up being a focus on LinkedIn and YouTube, as well as the private Clocktower Advisors channel, where we host the Community Consultants Collective. Big shout out there to my friends who are on that space. And I made those decisions very, very purposefully about those platforms based on the customers or the potential customers that I think are there, as well as the people that I think I interact the most with in those spaces. I think the voice is definitely a little different in each one of those areas. And again, that's got a lot to do with sort of understanding your customers and having some conversations with them about what they want to see. And I think we're all working to get better at this. But I even feel there's some voice differences between what I do with my LinkedIn company page versus what I do on my personal LinkedIn feed as well. And so there are some tonal differences, and it's a matter of understanding what actions you want people to take on those platforms and the tone that those platforms themselves adopt. I would be very different on Instagram if that was my play, and my tone of voice and approach and content style would be very different as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarity. And a final question, just before we've got about a minute or so. How do you effectively move people away from the places they're used to gathering to a more centralized hub, per your metaphor about the kitchen and the living room? How do you
Yeah,
do it?
I think first of all, it has to do with recognizing what people are using those platforms for, why they like them, why they think they're important, and then understanding what's not happening in those spaces, understanding that difference. And I think this goes back to a lot. Richard said some things that in the Fever Bee article about community everywhere, which I think has been kind of a central piece of this whole movement. That people. That we need to map those ecosystems. The community management, the community strategy is about mapping and understanding what those ecosystems are. I agree with that fully, and I think it's gaining a recognition of what people want in those spaces and understanding what they're not getting in those spaces. I worked with a pharma company some time ago that had a Facebook group that was dedicated to talking about treatments for a particular illness. And one of the shortcomings that came out from that group was that the community manager was getting private messages from members all the time and ended up spending a lot of time just recasting those messages out as public messages in the group, because it wasn't the right venue. It was the entry room. It wasn't the place where people felt comfortable sharing vulnerable facts about themselves. They needed a more private community space for that role. And I think that for me, that's one of the examples that always kind of comes back to my mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. That is I was nodding heartily because any of us community managers have been there in the inundation of DMs, and for the love of God, let's move into the public space. So, totally hear you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your insight, your time, your energy, your knowledge. And with that, we'll close this session, and I look forward to seeing you in the rest of this. Take a look at your chat. The people are praising you up and down the street. Um, Thank you, Todd.